great to see so many familiar folks that join us on our webinars. I'm Vicki Clark, president of the Cape May County Chamber of Commerce. And first, I'd like to thank Donna Vasir and our good friends at Cooper Levenson for sponsoring today's webinar. And we're going to, really get down into some real important information for all of our businesses today. Talking about dimensions of diversity and why diversity matters for your business. We will be taking questions in the chat feature and answering them at the end of the program. So I encourage you to go ahead and place them in the chat so that you get the context of your question while our speaker is going through her presentation. At the end of the program, I'll be giving Yolanda those questions. We'll also use the raised hand feature if you would like to ask your questions directly to her. So either way, whatever your preference is, I'd like to ask everyone to make sure that you're on mute during the presentation, and we'll get the program started. So now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, who is Yolanda in Melville, a partner with the firm and member of Cooper Levenson's land use, zoning and planning, education, school law, and cannabis practice groups. Yolanda works on various land use issues, including commercial development, redevelopment, real estate, affordable housing, and litigation. Yolanda also assists the Education Law Department in defense of claims of violation of the New Jersey Against Discrimination, as well as federal litigation matters, including alleged civil rights and IDEA violations. Yolanda attended the College of William & Mary, where she graduated with a dual degree in English and government. And Yolanda also earned a Master's of Science degree in criminal justice from Virginia Commonwealth University. She earned her Juris Doctor degree from Howard University School of Law, and she is based in the Cooper Levenson Attorneys at Law Atlantic City office. So it is my pleasure to introduce Yolanda and turn the program over to her. And again, thank you, Yolanda. We look forward to the presentation.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so thrilled to be here with you, albeit virtually. Hopefully this is going to be an informative session for you. And as President Clark said, if you have any questions about today's discussion, please put them in the chat and I'd be happy to answer them. I'll also provide a copy of the presentation today because I know there's going to be a lot of information that I'll share. And you may want to go back for your own reference to take a look at that afterwards. I do want to thank the Cape May County Chamber for having us today, President Clark, Director Faragasso, as well as the members of Cooper Levenson, and most importantly, our Director of Marketing, Donna Vasir, who is always here to support me as we go around the country and share about diversity and civil rights. Again, thank you to my Cooper Levenson colleagues who are on the line today, and I hope that everyone finds today's discussion to be extremely informative. And again, if you have any questions, please let me know. So why are we here today? We're talking about the dimensions of diversity and why diversity matters for your business. And it doesn't matter if you have a nonprofit organization or a for-profit company. Diversity does matter to your bottom line, as well as to the employees of your particular organization or company. And we'll discuss more in detail why those principles matter to how you should look at your workplace. So here are the fundamental concepts: diversity, equity, and inclusion. We also do overlook the compliance aspect, but I will go over these 4 principles in greater detail as we move along. But to give you a high level understanding of what diversity means, it just means what we represent, our identities, our differences, how we show up, our race, gender, whether we have a disability, our sexual orientation, our gender identity, where we came from, where our families have come from, maybe a tribe or a caste, a socioeconomic status, but also how we think and how we communicate. As President Clark stated, I went to the College of William & Mary. I was born in New York and I was raised in Virginia. So I have a duality of where I come from and how I show up in my workplace based on my experiences and where I lived. Equity. Equity really, distilled down to its most finest points, it really is our members of a workplace being treated fairly, Do they have access to equal opportunities? And do they have equal and fair access to information and resources? Inclusion simply is, do I feel like I belong? Building a culture of belonging by actively inviting contribution and participation of all people. And finally, compliance is the checked boxes, what the law requires, and whether we are actually adhering to those practices in our workplaces. And as most of us know, diversity, equity, inclusion is known as DEI in the space of diversity, equity, inclusion work. So what is diversity and what's not diversity? So first I want to discuss that diversity is not the person. There's no such thing as a diverse candidate. So I want many of us, as we leave here, when we're looking at persons to hire, a person themselves, himself, herself, they're not particularly a diverse person or a diverse candidate. Referring to a person as diverse would only make sense if we were all the same, but we're not. Referring to a person as diverse is increasingly used as a code for people who belong in groups considered as non-dominant or those who come from historically less privileged environments. Rather, diversity should be considered as a relational concept. Identities such as man, woman, light, white, heterosexual, cisgendered, able-bodied, English-speaking, and educated are considered examples of dominant or privileged groups. So we need to look at people on how they show up in a collective sense, the composition of what they bring to the table as far as experiences and their presence in a different setting, not the person themselves. I know this is a complicated concept, but the more you talk in the DEI space, the more normal and commonplace these discussions will be. Rather, we want to look at diversity in our workplaces as a journey that does begin on the personal level. Our unique identities bring a diverse contribution to our workspaces, from our appearance to the way we think, our likes or dislikes. Diversity of identity may relate to socialized or visible race, gender identity, religion, body shape, size, age, or sexual orientation, but it's those contributions that make us diverse and not the person themselves. What is equity and what's not equity? This is also a very important concept. Equity and equality are not the same. Equality has to do with giving everyone the exact same resource, whereas equity is geared toward distributing the resource based on a unique need of the recipient. Equity does not undermine equality. Again, I'll repeat that. Equity does not undermine equality. Rather, it brings a means to achieve equality in every space. A simple way to think about the difference of equality and equity is in terms of company swag, like a t-shirt. If an organization orders t-shirts for everyone in sizes small, medium, and large, the t-shirts will fit a range of people, but the sizes will fit some better than others. Some may be able to tuck the t-shirt in or roll up the sleeves to modify the fit, while others may not be able to get it over their heads due to the size, shape, or abilities of their own bodies. Rather, equality-inspired design gives everyone a t-shirt and assumes that the preset sizes of those t-shirts will suffice for everyone. But equity and an equity-inspired design of a t-shirt would take size-appropriate t-shirt orders from those who wear them and will order other requested swag items, such as pins, backpacks, or stickers. So everyone has something, a company swag that works for them. So companies must examine their diversity and equity efforts to design and implement in an equitable manner, even when it comes to company swag. This is a common example of the difference between equality and equity. Again, you see on the left here, everyone is given the same resource, but clearly each of the recipients of those resources cannot have full access to the world view. And in this example, it's a view of the game. On the right side, you see equity, where each individualized person is given a unique resource that is accustomed to their need so they can have full access. Lastly, what is inclusion and what's not inclusion? The most important thing I want you to take away from inclusion is that it does not happen organically. Every company, every organization, everyone has to design for inclusion because everyone is not the same. Everyone is diverse. They bring diverse styles, diverse thinking, diverse communication. We have to understand that it's not organic, like I said, it's not a natural consequence of putting people in a setting together and hoping that somehow they will all think alike, they'll share common ideas, and they'll mesh together. Rather, we need to understand that inclusion provides and values everyone's diverse contributions. Diversity and inclusion does not exclude. Rather, we must work for the people that we are designing for. Inclusion means that a person, for example, a person with a disability, has the same rights and accesses and choices as everyone in a community. And I'd like you to look at inclusion as a universal human right for all of us. Inclusion really does show up in our normal everyday life. And I have a few examples for us to think about as we move forward on what inclusion may look like. So here are 10 examples, or I'll give less than 10. A group of children volunteered to pack boxes of food at a local food pantry. Students help each other find books in a library. A customer, cashier, and grocery bagger chat at a store. A family rides roller coasters at a theme park. And a movie theater is sold out because for one show, the volume is turned down, the previews are cut, and the lights are kept low. And here's another example before I turn over to the next slide. People participate in religious services together. The last bullet on this page, I also want to address, inclusion actually enriches everyone's quality of life. In order to have pure inclusion, everyone's needs are addressed. There are threats to diversity, however, especially in the environmental context, and those come up as bias. So I'll talk about each one of the different kinds of biases individually. For example, implicit or unconscious bias is actually one that we talk about most. And it really is just the attitudes, stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner that are activated involuntarily without awareness or intentional control. It is important to note that everyone has implicit biases, whether they are negative or positive. Over My Shoulder is actually a really good book that I've been reading. It's called Blink by Malcolm Gladwell, and it really talks about unconscious bias and how we make snap judgments and snap decisions based on the experiences that we bring to the table. So how we discern an experience or a person is really made up of our past experiences. So this is something that is unintentional. It can be unintentional, it can be intentional, but we have to, actually it's unintentional, but we have to learn intentionally how to depress or minimize our implicit or unconscious bias as we show up in an environment, in a situation. Implicit bias is a threat to hiring practices. Why? Because again, you show up with a particular preset level of notions and decisions and thought processes about a person in which you come in contact with. But it also affects the morale of our workplaces. But it is not the only threat. Other forms of bias can subtly drive employment practices that preclude certain groups. The next one is confirmation bias. It's the tendency to seek out information that conforms and or confirms pre-existing views and ignores information that goes against one's views. This example we'll give as a new hire or a potential new hire named Bob. The hiring committee is talking to Bob about his experiences, and then they also want to have a debrief after interviewing. Confirmation bias will show up in the following example. One of the members of the hiring committee says, "I do not think Bob is a good candidate for this position. I don't think he'll fit in with our team. Our team is made up of outgoing people, and I think he said that he preferred to work autonomously." That's an example of confirmation bias. Information bias is the tendency to favor members of your own group. So for example, Another member of the hiring committee could say about Bob, all of the job applicants were qualified. I think we should go with Bob. He went to my alma mater and he's a veteran like me. That's an example of in-group bias. Projection bias is the tendency to find others that have the same attitudes and beliefs as you do. For example, another member of the hiring committee could say, Bob is similar to me. I think we should go with him. I think he would be a good fit for our team. Another touch point is that bias is learned. So guess what? It can be unlearned as well. There are two other points of bias that I do want to address. The first one is institutional bias. It's the tendency for procedures and practices of our particular institutions to operate in ways that result in certain groups being advantaged and favored and other groups being disadvantaged and devalued, even when the bias is not the result of any conscious practice or discrimination, but rather the majority simply following existing rules or norms. So in this example, institutional bias can be best shown in the Jim Crow laws of the early 1900s. These laws mandated separate but equal status for Black Americans in southern and border states of the United States. The achievement gap is also an example of institutional bias. And in our educational system, that creates certain advantages for certain classes of people or types of people and devalues and diminishes opportunities for other classes of people. And those are two examples of institutional bias. Institutional bias typically targets specific, easily stereotyped and generalized attributes of individuals, such as race or gender. Systemic bias, commonly known as systemic racism in a lot of contexts, refers to the systems in place that advantage white people and disadvantage people of color and other protected classes. So systemic bias should really be looked at as a broader term and not necessarily in the racial term. Systemic bias happens in nearly every facet of life: education, healthcare, employment, housing, the criminal justice system, and policing, as well as access to every healthy environment. It is what we know and understand as privilege. So for this example, think about the wealth gap. According to one study in the United States, white families hold 90% of the nation's wealth, whereas Latino families, Latinx families, or Hispanic families hold 2.3%, and Black families hold 2.6%. We also see systemic bias show up in the COVID-19 pandemic. Take a look at those communities which have been affected mostly by not just the COVID-19 pandemic, but the collateral effects of that: joblessness, lack of proper healthcare. And now we're also seeing it show up in how the vaccines are being distributed amongst communities in the United States. These issues stem from patterns of systemic bias. So how do we address these biases and really enhance diversities in our workplaces? These types of efforts can be distilled down into three different efforts. One is legal compliance, two is organizational effectiveness, and three is demographics. These are not just practices, but these are the motivations on why DEI is so important to your workplace. We will talk about legal compliance first. Diversity is a relatively new concept, probably as long as most of you have been alive. It began in the 1980s. And prior to diversity management, diversity in the workplace and how it showed up depended largely on affirmative action or equal employment opportunity programs to really address and redress past issues of discrimination. However, for much of the diversity's inclusion into the workspace or infusion into the workspace, many employers thought of diversity as a side issue or a collateral issue. Diversity was not incorporated into business decisions or actions of a particular workplace. And this approach continued on for 25 to 30 years. So how we see diversity now is not how we've seen it for for the majority of time, diversity has been a concept. As a result, the data showed that while certain populations, for example, women, were indeed entering the workforce, most reached career plateaus and few ever reached higher level positions in most sectors of our business community, as well as our governmental sector. Opportunities were being created, but there was a lack of intentionality for employers to bring certain groups into the decision-making space. Let's talk about the laws that mandated how diversity shows up in our workspaces. The first one we'll talk about is the Civil Rights Act of 1866. This is where we really begin to see a redress of past discrimination. And we see on the slide there that the Civil Rights Act of 1866 was to prohibit discrimination in civil rights or immunities on the account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. But we know that since that time, those classes have expanded, protected classes have expanded, but the first Civil Rights Act of 1866 really just addressed the past issues and vestiges of slavery and indentured servitude. Moving forward, we see the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So we go nearly a decade until we start seeing the federal government mandate civil rights law in our hiring practices. The 1964 Civil Rights Act includes the provision of Title VII that we know commonly, and it codified the protection of workers on the basis of race and color, as the 1866 Civil Rights Act did, but also sex and national origin. That now was expanded to include protections in the hiring practices, the pay and promotion, as well as employment termination. That Civil Rights Act was later amended to include protections based on age, pregnancy, and disability. Other laws were created afterward, including the Equal Pay Act, the ADA, as well as the Family Medical Leave Act of 1993. While the creation of these federal civil rights laws were expanding protections for many of the marginalized communities and persons in America, there were other major issues. Employers were required to amend their current practices, but were not charged with correcting past inequalities. So as a result, we saw employers operating in a space in which discrimination was illegal, but the policies and practices that were perpetuated in inequality among specific groups continued. And effectively, diverse populations were locked out of higher level decision-making despite skill or ability. And that was done intentionally or sometimes unintentionally. We also saw the United States Supreme Court last year in June of 2020 expand protections under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act to protect those who are being discriminated against because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. So we continue to see these civil rights acts evolve over time, whether in the progeny of the law, the statutory law, or the courts that continue to expand protected classes. So how does compliance show up in our workplaces? The Civil Rights Acts protected persons who were marginalized or often not seen in our workplaces, but how that showed up in the workplace were standards of behavior for employers, which birthed the age of compliance. So what do I mean by that? Compliance programs were internal policies or procedures set by organizations to check those boxes and comply with the law. These programs were often the basis to recruit, hire, and retain diverse populations. However, the compliance programs themselves were often reactive and were designed to prohibit discriminatory behavior. Compliance programs and their rules did not speak to the fundamental issues facing underrepresented populations or the value that those populations bring to the workplace. So today, seeking to be more proactive and inclusive, many companies are endeavoring to go beyond compliance and create substantive programs that recruit, hire, and retain underrepresented populations in their ranks. So let's get closer to home. Let's talk about New Jersey. New Jersey's history when it comes to the protection of protected classes is so important. And I hope that many of you understand it and honor it, because we were pretty much the thought leaders behind what we see today in the protection of certain classes of American people. In the 1940s, New Jersey became the first state since the Reconstruction era to pass a comprehensive anti-discrimination legislation. So as I discussed in the previous slides, 1866 was when you see the first Civil Rights Act, federally mandated. Then you see 1964. We're in the middle of that. 1940 is when the 1940s, particularly 1945, is when the New Jersey law of discrimination was passed. And in enacting the law against discrimination, or LAD, the New Jersey legislature recognized that discrimination, quote, threatens not only rights and proper privileges of the inhabitants of the state, but menaces the institutions and foundation of a free democratic state. Interestingly, April 16th, so in a few months, will commemorate the 75th anniversary of the passage of the New Jersey law against discrimination. And also interestingly, all members of the New Jersey legislature joined together to unanimously pass this historic law. The law against discrimination also created the Division on Civil Rights to enforce the LAD and have as a goal the eradication of the cancer of discrimination. And the New Jersey law against discrimination is universally regarded as one of the most comprehensive and respected anti-discrimination laws in this country. More recently, we find law against discrimination protections apply even if the issue stems from concerns related to COVID-19. So for example, if an employee repeatedly tells another colleague that he or she must have the coronavirus because he is from China, the company or the workplace could be liable if the employee reported it and it does not investigate or take action. Similarly, if someone is on a bus, for example, and they are wearing a yarmulke and someone starts screaming at them, the Jews are spreading the virus, the LAD requires the bus driver, because we're on a bus, to take action to stop that harassment. And as you see on the slide, the LAD pertains to harassment or discrimination based on actual or perceived protected classes, including race and religion, as well as gender identity and expression, as well as disability. So again, as I stated before, New Jersey has really been a front runner when it comes to protecting the civil rights of not just Americans, but New Jerseyans at large as well. So talking about diversity and human resources as we complete the compliance aspect of the motivations for diversity, let's talk about the Human Resources Office as well as what DEI and that office look like. Enhancing the diversity within the workforce is an organizational imperative and falls largely between these two departments, the newly created DEI offices as well as the long-standing human resources offices. The two work together due to an overlap in their domains, such as the creation of hiring practices and policies, training, recruitment, and workforce development. However, the two need to work together to facilitate greater diversity initiatives, but there can be clashes in their relationships. So as we look at the slide, the Human Resources Office is transactional. They're ensuring that the company or organization is complying with the laws, the law against discrimination, the civil rights laws that we discussed as well. And the DEI office is rather transformational. They're looking to the next steps. How can they move into the next space of ensuring that diversity, equity, inclusion happens in their workplace? Human resources, again, is geared toward compliance. They want to check boxes to make sure that the company or organization is not breaking the law. The DEI office, however, is geared toward identifying inequities and finding ways to address them to make sure that all people feel included in the workplace. Human resources is reactive. It addresses the issues that have already come up. Rather, DEI is proactive, and they look for more opportunities to not only get diverse talent to the workspace, but also to retain it. So what are some of the examples and recommendations for compliance? One is hiring a chief diversity officer or a chief equity officer in your workplace. Also taking a look at your legal claims over the last 5 to 10 years. We want to make sure that your workplace, your staff are trained on proper DEI efforts, and also providing anti-bias education to your employees, and also maybe possibly providing those resources to the community at large, your customers, those in which you interact. And as always, sending any and all claims to trusted and reputable legal counsel if you have any issues with regard to discrimination complaints. The next motivation for diversity in your workplace is organizational effectiveness. What is organizational effectiveness? Essentially, it just means, what is the workplace getting out of bringing a diverse workforce to the table? And the benefits are clear. The studies have shown that the benefits of a more diverse workplace include diversity of perspective, increased creativity, boosting the reputation, boosting morale in your employees, more employee engagement, less employee turnover, increased productivity, and of course, the business decisions, increases to your profits and your bottom line. And if you are a front runner in diversity in your community, it makes you as an employer more competitive, and as well as the business as well. Why does diversity matter in business? One is fairness. When a workforce does not reflect the makeup of a community, it affects how your constituents or your consumers feel about what you're offering. If the people who are answering the phone may not speak their language, they may not understand what they're trying to say in a cultural sense, that may affect how that customer feels about procuring your services. Participation. Lack of diversity can depress morale. If someone in your office does not feel that they are included, that can affect his or her work product. Status quo. We talked about bias, but one we did not address is status quo bias. It's the bias of keeping things exactly the same and not changing, although the global community around you is changing. And what we find is lack of diversity maintains the status quo for not just your workplace, but also the community at large. And justice. As we talked about compliance earlier, we want to ensure that there is a decrease in the disparities and the disparate treatment towards your customers, your employees, and the general public. Not only are those protected by law, but we want to ensure that we're doing things internally to address, they just don't happen at all. What is DEI work and what's not? Again, like I said, DEI work is not simply about checking off the boxes as we saw in the compliance stage of the diversity era, but rather it's a reminder to renew, reinvent, and grow as the community around you starts to grow and diversify. DEI work will drive influence in the workplace and growth in the marketplace. DEI is not an expense or cost center. Rather, DEI initiatives are an investment, and they actually show that they are profit-making mechanisms and also cost-saving mechanisms. They're not a quick fix. They're a long-term strategy. Most leaders cannot, and as a result, have no idea how big the opportunity gaps are in their workplaces, and let alone which ones need to be solved. So that's why companies are solving for the wrong things at the wrong time, and thus opportunity gaps are continuing to widen. This is also not about being recognized for doing a good thing. You have to start gaining the respect by actually recognizing and listening to the people with whom you respect, or the ones you want to earn their respect, and the unique differences that he or she bring to the table, whether it's a community, whether it's your constituency, or whether it's simply your workplace. You need to understand and respect how the differing opinions and diverse experiences of your employees, clients, and the business world play into the everyday operations of your workspace. So what are some recommendations on organizational effectiveness? One is to have a clearly defined organizational culture, whether it's in your mission statement, a vision statement. You need to convey to your employees as well as the community at large how you fit what does your culture look like? You also need to have a leader who sets the vision, creates expectations, and removes barriers for your team to achieve its goals. You also have to identify specific areas. Again, this is hard work. You have to really do the work in identifying how you can improve and creating metrics and accountability to improve those actions if you want to move closer to a really balanced DEI culture. And as you do that, simultaneously, it's top down. You need to also convey to your supervisors, directors, and your employees how they're responsible for continuing and contributing to a proper DEI centered workplace. And this is something that we often do not emphasize. We have to review the metrics, whether you do an employee engagement survey or you're looking at your retention policies. Continue to review those accountability measures and review those metrics on a regular basis, whether it's 6 months to a year, but do them very regularly to understand the evolution of DEI in your workspace. So this was a gem I found. I don't know if any one of you are actually part of the Eastland Theater down there in Cape May, but I recently, last month, its board of directors approved its commitment, a commitment on one of the website's pages about their culture. They talk about how they are having a commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. And they talk about the past vestiges of discrimination and racism, and they're looking forward to finding ways to contribute and eradicate discrimination in the future. And this is a clear example of a clearly defined organizational culture that I want to show from your own community. Another example of DEI has come in the space of corporate responsibility, and also known as corporate social responsibility. Now, this has come up a lot in last weekend's Super Bowl because there were a lot of different companies who decided to take their money and not put the big ads on display during the Super Bowl and actually contribute their money to COVID-19 vaccination or helping to distribute those vaccinations equitably in communities. But you also see it on the advertisements themselves. So I'll give you an example. The Olay ad featured the hashtag Make Space for Women, and it featured the all-female space crew currently on the International Space Station. Verizon 5G also emphasizes commitment to every American community and the importance of first responders. Grubhub extended its commitment to the No Kid Hungry campaign that it started in 2019. And these were on full display for all America to see on one of the most watched events in the history of television, the Super Bowl. But why did they do that? They wanted to ensure that corporate responsibility, diversity, equity, and inclusion were at the forefront of their messages to all of their constituents and all of their consumers, because this is important to the bottom line of these companies, but also the kind of reputation and integrity of their brand that they're looking forward to bringing out to the future. Today's companies are intrinsically connected to the consumers they serve, the people they employ, and the communities in which they operate. So we're starting to see more and more social responsibility happen on the corporate level and in branding in which they propose. Lastly, we'll talk about demographics. This is another piece of information I found on the internet. It is the June 27, 2020, NJ.com news article about how diversity is increasing in New Jersey. And it says here that all of New Jersey's 21 counties saw their minority populations grow over the decade, with Hispanic, Asian, and in many cases, Black residents making up a greater portion of their demographics than 10 years before. So let's talk about Cape May County specifically. Your population is around 93,000. You have a median income of $63,000 a year, and you have about 41,000 employees, which is a slight decrease since last year. Your median age is 49 years old, which is the Generation X, but we're seeing an increase in the millennial and Generation Z populations moving into Cape May, and 77% of your residents own houses. So let's examine Cape May with regard to the statistics of New Jersey and the United States at large. 92% of your residents have high school diplomas, which is slightly higher than the national and state averages. You have about 17% of your residents are 18 years or under, and 27% are 65 years or older, which means that you have over 50% of your population between the ages of 18 and 64, which means you have a very high workforce population. Your gender statistics actually run almost identically to the United States and the state, New Jersey state at large. 51% women and 49% men. And 92% of your residents are United States residents. Let's look at your race and ethnicities. This is only for the top 4 races that show up in your statistics. So right now you're trending higher when it comes to the white population or non-Hispanic population, 91%. But as the article has demonstrated, you have an increase of populations, including the Hispanic, Latinx, Black, and Asian populations. So you have 4.8% of your population is Black, which trends a little bit lower than the state average and the United States at large. Hispanic, again, 8.1%, which has shown an increase in your area, but still is running a little bit lower than the state and national averages. And again, Asian is 1%. So when we talk about demographics, typically as we think about demographics, this is what we see about people. We see their age, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender, and this is how we think about a person. This is how they show up. I'm encouraging everyone here today, so every time you take a look at a consumer, a customer, a person in your workplace, a friend, a community member, to examine them just like this. Everyone brings unique, diverse attributes to your space. We see that they are made up of a panoply of different diverse experiences, likes, dislikes, and it's not just about how old they are, what their race is, what their national origin is, what they practice as far as religion, but really a different set of diverse experiences that make up each and every one of us. This is an example that I use in most of my DEI discussions or planning discussions. These are 2 people I made up, Nikisha Robinson and Zach O'Kelly. Let's imagine that they are in one of your workplaces. Nikisha is female, she's 23 years old, she's African-American. Zach is a male, he's 34 years old and Irish. Zach works in the IT department and Nikisha works down in the administrative offices. Zach and Nikisha really do not discuss anything with each other, except for if she has a problem with her internet. But we want to encourage Nikisha and Zach to really have a conversation, because why? They both honor and value honesty, service, and trust, and that's why they came to work at your workplace. We need to ensure that Zach and Nikisha do find time and spaces to connect with one another and actually engage, because that makes the workplace better, it makes productivity for each one of them better, and certainly will provide other important incentives for your workplace. So what are recommendations on how to increase demographics in your workplace, or the motivations behind how to advance them? Create opportunities for advancement of historically marginalized groups. For example, this is Black History Month. Next month is Women's History Month. Is your workplace doing something to honor those months? That every day of the year is a special commemorative day. So you can infuse those commemorative days into the culture of your workplace if they allow or appeal to the persons with whom you work with. You can modify recruitment efforts. Blind hiring practices are very important to how we can help to reduce implicit biases as well as other biases. But diversifying in publications of how you're putting advertisements for new opportunities, making sure you're doing that in different languages, and creating multifaceted hiring committees, age, race, maybe where they're from, what school they went to. Those add to the value of a more diverse workplace. Creating a diversity committee if you don't already have one. Celebrating diversity through the year. For example, like I said about Black History Month and Women's History Month. Creating employee resource groups. These are special affinity groups that really get to the heart of a collective experience that some of your employees may share with one another. Being intentional about DEI jargon on behalf of your employees. So for example, what does cisgender mean? What does heteronormative mean? Also creating a pipeline or mentorship program and the creation of leadership academies as well. So final thoughts before I wrap this up. Diversity in the workplace rarely happens organically. You have to pay special attention to your recruitment, job postings, and the treatment of your employees to enhance diversity and create an atmosphere of inclusion. Also, I encourage many of our workplaces to do a SWOT analysis. What are we doing well? What can we improve? What are some opportunities? And what's at stake if we do not advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in our workplaces? And finally, one of my favorite quotes is from the VP of Inclusion Strategy of Netflix. She says that diversity is being invited to a party, but inclusion is being asked to dance. So thank you all for joining me. I know I went a little over, President Clark, but I thank you for giving me the time to share.
Thank you so much, Yolanda. That was a great presentation, and you've given us a lot of material to take back and use in our own businesses and to think about. And I would just like to open it up to everyone for your questions and comments. So we don't have anything in the chat right now. So just like to give everyone a moment or two to just think about, what questions you might have to talk to Yolanda about. So while everyone might be thinking about that, I'll just take a moment to just to say that, I find it really interesting, with those stats about Cape May County, sometimes, even when we might intentionally want to have more diversity in our workplaces, it's difficult, because we're not a very diverse county. And, it's not as, we may have a plan, but it's not as easy to bring that diversity in intentionally. It may just happen organically, but you look around and then everybody really is more of the same. And so, and then when you have the opportunity to have someone who brings diversity onto your team, then you have to have that commitment to be more welcoming and also to for that inclusion part of it, which sometimes I think can be a little challenging, making sure that everyone is on the same page in your staff.
Absolutely. It's this continuing dance, as the VP of Netflix says, about how to balance diversity, how to retain diversity, how to attract diversity, but also how to make everyone who is currently employed at your workplace feel that they belong there. It's difficult, and I will give the most benign example I can. I find that with my clients, the hardest person that they can find is director of facilities or a maintenance person. Now that there could be a lot of reasons for that, but for some reason in this area, it's very hard to find anyone who can do maintenance. And there are opportunities for them to post and publicize those opportunities way out. 100-mile radius just to find a maintenance person. And I think that using that and giving an analogy to our current spaces, we have to look at what today's workforce looks like. Millennials and Generation Zers are not going to want the same things that Generation X or even our baby boomers honored or wanted. They like work-life balance, or they like remote working opportunities. And even with the COVID-19 pandemic, we find a lot of them are not wanting to move into urban spaces, but are looking for more suburban environments. Can places like Atlantic County and Cape May County capitalize on this newfound technological workforce to diversify in ways that they otherwise didn't think about? It may not work for every workplace, but certainly that's one way. And we're also a tourism district. So there are places that we might find diversity in our consumers, but not necessarily our employers. Are we making our spaces more family friendly? Are we making sure that disabled persons have access to our services? there are just different ways that we can take a hard, bright line look at what we're offering and how to be innovative and how to attract diversity in different types of ways, whether it's on the service end or whether it's on the internal end with our employees.
We got some very, very interesting feedback recently on a ad. I don't know, Britta, if you remember the specifics on this, but something we posted on one of our social media feeds, that, you know, people really commented on the lack of diversity in the ad. And it was, you know, it was not intended for that. And sometimes you have no control over that. But you know, people are very, very quick to pick up on those things and to take offense if they can't see themselves in what you're putting out there.
I think someone has their raised hand, President Clark.
Oh,
you're right.
Sorry,
it can be so unintentional.
Okay. Let's see. Was that Stephanie?
Yes, that's me. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
I guess this is really more, well, first I just want to tell Yolanda that exceptional presentation. I love that last analogy about being, not just being invited to the party, but being asked to dance. And I think that's a perfect analogy of what our school district is kind of going through. I'm on the Middle Township School Board, and we have been struggling for many years, continue to struggle in attracting and retaining minority teachers. And, you know, you have to truly be intentional. And I can't say that we have increased our efforts to intentionally reach out, intentionally going to certain forums where new teachers are looking for jobs, going to the HBCUs. And as President Vicki said, Cape May County is, I guess, in many ways, not all that diverse. And so sometimes to attract someone, I'm saying from the outside, a non-Cape May County person to move here, a minority person to move here, it's been difficult. It really has, because you have to think of someone who didn't, grow up here, coming to this kind of environment. And Cape May County, we're kind of like, we're on a peninsula. We can be a little isolated sometimes. And it's been one of those things that we've just continued to struggle with, but, being as intentional as we can. And that's, saying that you have to not only invite them to the party, but then ask them to dance. And I think that asking to dance is what we have to continuously work on when we are kind of trying to recruit these teachers, keeping them involved, making them feel welcome, and making them, feel that they matter, their presence is important, why it's important, and not only for the students, but even for their coworkers to have diverse, peers to bounce things off of. So I guess it's more of a comment, just kind of to say, I understand truly what you're saying. And being on the school board, we are fighting that every day.
Thank you, Vice President Thomas, for the Middletown School of Education, Board of Education. You're not only a client of ours, so we thank you also for joining us, but also you're a dear friend of mine. So Stephanie, thank you for joining.
Well, I don't see any of the raised hands or comments in the chat, and we are coming up on our hour. So again, I would just like to thank you, Yolanda, and Cooper Levenson for the presentation and for sponsoring today's webinar. And I'll just take a moment to let everyone know what we have coming up, because next Wednesday, on the 17th, we have a webinar that is by the Pro New Jersey Grantor Trust Fund that will be about if you are a business that is interested in the offshore wind industry. This is how women-owned businesses and minorities can tap into the grant opportunity to invest in your business. Then on Thursday, February the 18th, we have our February membership meeting. On Wednesday, the 24th, Again, sponsored by Cooper Levenson, we have the Economic Recovery Act of 2020 webinar. So you want to tune into that. On March the 6th, that's the Friday night, we're going to do something fun and different. We're going to have a virtual wine tasting dinner with Cape May Winery. So that's going to be a really fun event. You're going to want to look for the information on that and how you can participate. And then on Thursday, March the 18th, we will have the State of Cape May County update with our Commissioner Director, Jerry Thornton, and that will be sponsored by South Jersey Federal Credit Union. So all that information is on capemaycountychamber.com. Look for that and watch for more information in our daily updates that come to you between 4 and 4:30 every day. So again, thanks everyone. Have a wonderful day. And this is a holiday weekend coming up. So I hope you do something fun, and happy Valentine's Day. Thanks everybody.
Thank you.